So imagine finding out that one person in your life is quietly making you 9 months older and you don't even realize it. Like researchers weren't studying diet or exercise, they were studying people. And they call these people hasslers. Not strangers, not enemies, but people, your family, your friends, your coworkers who constantly stress you out. So every single hassler in your life is linked to about 9 months of extra biologic aging. You don't feel older, but you're actually aging at a cellular level.
I thought it was like a really interesting, and frankly, I'd never thought about it, that you can have this social network and you still, this still can harm you. And if there's someone who's a hassler. It's
this
almost
really brings to mind the adage of don't stay away from people who avoid people who bring you down. Maybe it has repercussions for our aging.
I think we can maybe ask all of our listeners to take a catalog of all the people who they interact with in their social networks. And if they have any hasslers, you can keep them in the hassle group and keep them in your lives, but realize that they may be helping you age a little faster than what you actually want. Welcome to Only Oncologists in the building. I am Shalan Beg. I'm a medical oncologist. I'm joined today by my colleagues Shruti Patel from California and Emil Liu from Minnesota. Welcome to our next episode. So imagine finding out that one person in your life is quietly making you 9 months older and you don't even realize it. I was reading a new study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it stopped me cold. Like researchers weren't studying diet or exercise, they were studying people. And they call these people hasslers. Not strangers, not enemies, but people, your family, your friends, your coworkers who constantly stress you out. Maybe they drain you a little bit and they make your life just a little bit harder. So they're a hassler because they hassle your day. So every single hassler in your life is linked to about 9 months of extra biologic aging. You don't feel older, but you're actually aging at a cellular level. And women, hear me closely. Women are more likely than men to have hasslers in their lives. More emotional labor, more difficult relationships, more
Classic.
stress carried. More stress. Yeah, and that causes more stress, right? And surprisingly, spouses, if they are hasslers, don't have an effect on aging. So it's possible that the benefits of the spouse outweighs any hassling impact that a spouse really has. So the question is who in your life is costing you time? And protecting peace is important, but it can actually help strengthen your lifespan. I know we talked about this in the group chat. Curious to hear your thoughts about the study.
Suddenly I'm thinking that not doing the dishes is not really affecting the relationship, no matter what my wife says. So I'm not a hassler.
I don't know that your wife wants you to take that away. I will on her behalf, I will speak. But I think the study is crazy interesting. And I think the part that I thought was interesting is I think a lot of public health research in this space focuses on loneliness, and it focuses on lack of social support and social connections. And so I thought it was a really interesting, and frankly, I'd never thought about it, that you can have this social network and you still this still can harm you. And if there's someone who's a hassler. I don't know. I thought that was a cool, separate thing. You hear about the male loneliness epidemic, you hear about all those other things, but this is something that you don't really hear about.
Yeah, what came to mind when I heard this, I mean, of course, we're coming at it from oncology perspective, but healthcare in general, we think of health disparities. And I just think of we don't yet know the biological causes, the underpinnings of certain cancers. And for example, triple negative breast cancer comes to mind, but we also know heart disease, and many other cardiovascular and other risk factors, and including stroke and others, that there are clear health disparities, and whether it's access to care, underdiagnosis, but also maybe driving factors. And I think that's what came to mind when I first read this study.
It makes it very difficult for us to really think about non-clinical determinants of health. Because we talk about non-clinical determinants of health or social determinants of health, we think about food insecurity, the zip code that you live in, what the quality of the air is, what the family structure and the marital structure is. But I don't really remember any time where we've tried to quantify what someone's social network is like. and how they view that network and how that changes. Again, Emil, you brought up the point about a cancer diagnosis, how someone's social network changes after a cancer diagnosis and what kind of impact that can have on people's outcomes. Now, we're talking about aging here. We're talking about measures of aging, which are just in the process of being validated, like blood and saliva biomarkers of aging. But still, it's pretty intriguing because they looked at how other factors can impact aging. So we know that our BMI, the shape of someone's body, where they carry fat, those factors can contribute to aging. And in the study, those were associated with aging. And interestingly, height was not associated with aging, which kind of makes sense because that's a fixed measure which doesn't really change in someone's life after they achieve adulthood. So from a rational standpoint, when we look at these clinical variables, they also made some biological sense, which made it a little more interesting on the Hassler aspect and the social network aspect. And when we talk to our patients, like, how much time do we really spend bringing these points up?
It's
this
almost
really
like
brings to mind the adage of don't stay away from people who avoid people who bring you down. Maybe it has repercussions for our aging.
I was gonna say, I feel like there's definitely some people in my life that, like, growing up, mom and dad, they're like, gotta be nice to them, like, even if they're treating you not well. And I am looking forward to sending mom and dad this study and being like, hello, let me show you data and evidence. Not that this is, obviously the slam dunk. There's definitely some limitations to the study, but hey, anything I could do to be like, protecting your peace isn't just something that you do for yourself. Apparently, on a cellular level, it might have, some changes. And to your point about, it's almost like they controlled for things that we know accelerate aging, right? With the BMI and things that we assume don't, like height, and it almost validates their results a little bit more.
So I mentioned women. Women are more likely than men to have at least one Hassler. Daily smokers are more likely to have Hasslers in their lives. People with poor general health were more likely to report that they have Hasslers. And people who've had adverse childhood experiences showed a higher likelihood of having Hasslers in their social circles.
So that's I think of. Go ahead.
So I guess, I had a question for you guys, which is that, do you guys think, we talked about what we see with cancer and things like that. Does this match what we see clinically? Like with chronic stress, difficult family dynamics, have you guys seen that this affects patients' health?
Yeah. Sometimes you have, at least, from an oncology clinic perspective, sometimes you have people who don't have any caregivers or any supporters or family, friends or otherwise, and others who have a room full, right? They'll come with extended family and up and down the generations and friends or someone from their faith group or whatever, or even friendly neighbors. But I think it just, when I think of, I'm just kind of just flight of ideas here as I've heard both of you talk, and some points in this is I think of cause and effect. We talked about this so many times on different studies, right, for our podcast. But I think it's hard to tease out individual factors. But now I think we're encroaching upon the endocrinology world. I think of hormones and hormone spikes, and we know stressors. I'm just thinking of measurable biomarkers, right? How do you measure how bad is one Hassler over another? How long does somebody have to, quote, hassle you? And what's the intensity of hasslement? And hasslement, I'll make up a new word instead of entanglement and hasslement. If someone has to hassle you for how long and what defines a Hassler? Many fascinating questions, but I could foresee that if it became something like inflammatory markers of aging that we know that when we wake up in the morning, we have cortisol spikes. We drink our coffee and they got a cortisol spike, but we're looking for energy. But we also know the extreme is fight or flight. So is it something where there's a baseline and then that emerges as fight or flight in more extreme situations through these Hasslers? But that I'm still trying to get my head around that 9 months part. But hopefully the counteract to that is having anti-Hasslers or somebody who will counteract Hasslers, or maybe having more non-Hasslers and more supportive people than Hasslers in one's life to maybe neutralize that effects of aging.
And the context really is like we think a lot about people who have already been diagnosed with cancer and their cancer survivorship experience. But let's think about the decades that someone has lived prior to when they may walk into our office, and the factors that are driving their health and the factors that are driving their ability to manage their respective conditions, whether that's diabetes, high blood pressure, heart problems, or even cancer for that matter. When I think about aging, we talk about how someone may look their stated age or may not look their stated age, younger or older than their stated age, and I think we all have biases in how we interpret those. But I will start thinking more closely about different factors and what is this entire field which is able to quantify someone's biologic age, and what, because that is also a very booming industry in the entire longevity field, and what are the tools which are likely that I would recommend someone get during their care and then repeatedly during their lifetime versus those that are probably just a fad. And the ones that they chose in this PNAS study are two that have been validated across multiple conditions and different aspects of faith in the ones that they pick. But there is a whole industry around this space, which is getting even stronger, and we have to be careful in selecting those tools. And what are the validation populations that it was validated in? What are the conditions that they were studied for? And how good those predictions were for outcomes such as cardiovascular disease or cancer or stress or anxiety.
I mean, I think that's the most important thing. I think that's the most important thing, right? Like, there's all these, like, how do we separate the clinical value from the noise? Right. I think that there's always going to be new tests that come out. There's a million things we could measure in our bodies, right? There's just different proteins, now with epigenetics, right? We're measuring proteins that are sitting on the DNA. Like, there's going to be so many things that we can measure. And how do we think about the clinical utility and not get lost in the noise of all these tests so that we can actually help people make their lives longer and better?
Okay, this brings to mind, I was reading about a wellness center recently that for thousands upon thousands of dollars, you go for basically a retreat for 7 days, and they test, I think it was like literally 120 to 200 biomarkers. And I know the word, we all know, each of us knows the word biomarker really well, about thinking, wow, where did you get 120 or to 200, let alone 10, that will, with accuracy measure, that's a different story.
I just got an Instagram ad for probably that same thing. It was like, they also added multi-detection, cancer, full body MRI, and then the 100 plus biomarkers. And I was like, I would love to see that list and talk about it on the podcast. Because,
so we may have to do our research and do that next time.
There's some very validated biomarkers that can help people, obviously, but then there's some that are not. And I think it'd be an interesting segue. But hold on, one more thing I wanted to mention on a positive note. Yeah. And one more thing I wanted to bring up was that 30% of the people, 29% of the people in the study said that they had a Hassler. Like, and to me, okay, do I wish that not 30% had a Hassler? Yes. But that means 70% of people were like, I'm looking through my whole social network and there isn't a single person that's hassling me. And I don't know, that made me really happy that, like, if I had to guess, I think I would guess that more people had Hasslers than 30% or 29%. And so, I don't know. I just wanted to that's to me a positive thing that and that also tells me that they defined Hasslers well, because I'm sure everybody has someone who kind of annoys them in their life, or just I have to do this for this person or whatever. So they have to define that as something that actually causes chronic stress, in my opinion. And so I was just happy about that, because I'm like, that's for the population that 70% of them are I don't have people in my social network who harass me.
That is positive. Maybe on any given day, it might be 70. It might be the reverse, 70%. But yeah, actually 30%. You're right. That's a good point. I think it's much lower than I would have predicted.
You bring up a good point, though, that like cross-sectional testing versus longitudinal testing, right? Where social relationships, like they're dynamic. And so really follow-up studies on this really need to look at that. I imagine that you ask me one day, myself, just one day I might be like, I have no hustlers, my life is great. And then, maybe a week later, I'm like, oh my God, I have like 10 hustlers. Not 10, but you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I feel like it's like, understanding the dynamics of it might be a good thing. And I maybe not week to week, but like, over the course of years.
So Emil, Shruti, great discussion. I think we can maybe ask all of our listeners to take a catalog of all the people who they interact with in their social networks. And if they have any hustlers, you can keep them in the hassle group and keep them in your lives, but realize that they may be helping you age a little faster than what you actually want. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much.